Okay, let's unpack this. We've been handed a truly electric assignment.
Uh-huh.
Our source material is a series of excerpts from The New Yorker, published in 1939.
Right.
A year that, in the rearview mirror looks exactly like the precipice of global catastrophe.
Yeah.
We all know what happened next.
And that hindsight is precisely the trap we have to avoid. It's so easy to fall into.
A history lesson?
This isn't a history lesson. We are treating 1939 not as a narrative leading inevitably to war, but as a live operating laboratory of social and institutional rules.
A laboratory. I like that.
Our analytical lens is cold and, frankly, anti-nostalgic. We are running the structures of that year as a stress test for 2026.
So we're asking things like, what were the rules governing capital flow?
Yes.
What did sophisticated high-end media choose to focus on? Where did people put their trust? And I guess which profound structural risks were just systematically dismissed while that society was, suspended between the painful memory of the Depression and the inescapable horror of the Second World War?
We're looking for patterns.
Patterns in the power dynamics that repeat today.
We're looking for echoes in the institutional logic. Because the sources reveal a sophisticated, educated society obsessed with fashion, food, and celebrity, even as the formal systems of politics, finance, and global security were visibly buckling.
That disconnect.
Our mission is to understand that disconnect, that profound cognitive dissonance, because that is a constant feature of eras defined by extreme risk.
Our goal is to extract those nuggets of insight. Let's jump in.
Let's do it.
So the first thing that really jumps off the page is this almost schizophrenic quality of public attention. You see these high-stakes, existential news items sitting right next to total cultural triviality, and the public seems perfectly fine processing both at the same time.
It's incredible compartmentalization.
On the one hand, the sources mention the massive, costly defense program, an explicit commitment of billions of dollars and, national will to deter the Axis powers.
Right, that's the state apparatus. It's gearing up, preparing for the absolute worst-case scenario.
Yeah. And then you turn the page, and the most popular piece of American fiction, the cultural darling of the moment, is about Ferdinand the Bull.
Ferdinand the Bull, a creature whose defining characteristic is pacifism.
He just wants to sit and smell the flowers. He doesn't want to fight.
And this juxtaposition is vital for our stress test.
Yeah.
It's not just a cute anecdote. It shows that even when the state institution is gearing up for existential conflict and military mobilization,
The culture provides a counter-narrative.
an overwhelming necessary counter-narrative of ambivalence, of escapism, and, like you said, almost childish innocence.
So the structural appetite for immediate, comforting distraction, even when there's a recognized existential peril, is just immense.
It has to be. The
And-
culture acts as a kind of emotional regulator, It smooths out the panic that would be caused by the state's necessary but terrifying actions.
So the machine can keep running.
Absolutely. The machine must run, and the machine requires distraction. If everyone was panicking about the defense budget all the time, they wouldn't buy rayon stockings or go to Noel Coward plays. The culture provides a kind of necessary functional denial.
And that compartmentalization gets even more interesting when we look abroad. We have specific reports from France.
Yes, and the mood there toward the impending conflict was strikingly analytical, even intellectualized.
The sources describe a rigid, almost unemotional feeling against the Nazi regime, but they specifically note there were no curses against La Salle Bush.
No generalized hatred of the German people.
Right.
This is a crucial distinction, and it's one that highlights the intellectual class's attempt to refine the nature of the conflict. The opposition was focused purely on the structure of power.
The Nazi regime and Hitler himself,
Exactly. The French intellectual class was thinking, ce coco-là, nous l'aurons.
which translates roughly to.
That fellow will get him. It's targeted. It's personal, but it's political.
So they were trying to frame it as an ideological problem, a specific cancerous power structure, not just a nationalist blood feud.
Precisely. This suggests a desire to maintain a high level of civilized, analytical engagement with the threat. They were resisting the urge to descend into simple, jingoistic hate, which is often the institutional tool of mobilization, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It speaks to a kind of refined intellectual process, maybe a brittle one, trying to keep the focus on the regime rather than the people. If you compare that to our modern digital sphere, where geopolitical conflicts instantly descend into the most generalized, dehumanizing identity politics,
It's a world away.
in its sophisticated media, 1939 was at least attempting to hold a higher, more targeted line.
But that structural threat was accelerating so rapidly. This is captured in a review of Vincent Sheehan's book on Europe, which covered the period from March 1938 to March 1939. The reviewer used a very specific reference, describing the sequence of events as being like Alger stories.
And we really need to unpack that for listeners today. Horatio Alger's stories were the classic American tales of the 19th and early 20th century.
The rags to riches guy.
Right. Simple, moralistic narratives where the hero, through sheer hard work, morality, and pluck, always succeeded and triumphed over the villain. They preached the logic of an orderly, predictable moral universe.
So when the reviewer calls the rise of fascism Alger stories, he's saying the opposite is happening.
He is. He's being deeply ironic. He notes that in this series of real-life events, disturbingly, the villain fascism succeeds every single time.
It's the inverse Alger story.
It is. And this encapsulates the core structural risk they did see. The incredible, frightening speed with which a singular, politically violent ideology could unilaterally and rapidly alter established geographical and political frameworks.
The whole map was being redrawn.
The system recognized that fascism was disrupting the established map and the established rules of engagement faster than any force since, well, the unification of Germany decades earlier.
So the intellectual class saw the velocity of the political upheaval, but daily life, the cultural machine, the consumption machine, just kept humming along.
That's the institutional paralysis you mentioned earlier. The system sees the threat, but its core function, which is producing distraction and maintaining commerce, overrides the imperative for a structural change in behavior.
Which brings us to the great systemic blind spot.
Yes, what this otherwise highly sophisticated society failed to fully process or integrate into its operating structure.
They noted, for instance, that the conflict on the Western Front was a standstill war.
The phony war.
Right, and it was consuming hope and money, leading to inevitable poverty for all sides. So the immediate material drain that was registered.
They could see the bank account shrinking.
But the sheer scale and ferocity of the coming total war, that wasn't truly understood, was it?
Not structurally, no. The implications of total war were filtered out because the existing institutional structures, military, political, and cultural, were designed to process conflict in the model of the previous one.
World War I. Contained, trench-based, long, but fundamentally limited in some ways.
Exactly. The analysis for French reports, for example, suggests a strong hope that the war would turn into something else during the winter, owing to mud, treachery, diplomacy, disaffection, or disgust.
They were hoping for anything but the blitzkrieg and the global slaughter that actually happened. They were hoping for inefficiency, for it to just get bogged down.
They were hoping the conflict would remain contained, nuanced, diplomatic, and, yes, perhaps delightfully stuck in the mud. This shows a systemic preference for believing the conflict would remain manageable rather than accepting the revolutionary speed and efficiency of modern industrialized warfare.
The institution preferred the model of slow attrition.
Over rapid fundamental collapse, yes.
That preference for slowness is a fascinating institutional self-deception. But here's the most disturbing blind spot, the one that feels most relevant to today. The complete dismissal of profound ideological commitment as mere fashion. We have a source mentioning a character solving his life problems by going to Spain and getting killed by the fascists, and the writer just shrugs it off.
And I've shrugged. That dismissal is institutionalized blindness distilled. The writer says that suicide by ideology may be fashionable at the moment, but it doesn't resolve issues.
Fashionable at the moment.
Think about that phrasing. By labeling radical political action, literally crossing an ocean to die in a foreign civil war for a cause, as a fleeting consumer trend, the dominant, safe, consumer-driven culture structurally refuses to grapple with the seriousness of political fervor.
Or the conviction of those operating outside the mainstream.
So if you're a political dissident or a radical, you're just a temporary influencer with bad taste.
Pretty much.
The system couldn't compute immense non-economic energy. Ideology, passion, religious fervor, the willingness to die for a principle, these were all treated as mere consumer preferences, like choosing one brand of cigarette over another.
And that meant?
It meant the institutional system completely failed to account for the immense non-monetary energy that was actually driving the totalitarian movements and mobilizing millions. That structural dismissal of ideological commitment, treating profound belief as trivial, is a failure we see repeating when we analyze modern online political movements or radicalization.
We dismiss them as niche or temporary.
A fashionable moment.
Until they've already seized power.
Right.
So, if the intellectual and political systems were struggling, the cultural system was running at maximum capacity to provide a functional escape hatch.
Oh, absolutely. The sheer volume of sophisticated cultural output served as the ultimate structured distraction. We see the long-running Refined Review, Hell's a Poppin'.
Which ran for an astonishing 24 seasons.
Incredible. And that's alongside Pulitzer Prize winners like Abe Lincoln in Illinois and Noel Coward's sophisticated musical Set to Music.
So the institution of entertainment was operating not just at scale, but with incredible resilience.
24 pages of dense listings in the magazine. From Maurice Evans's 4-hour performance of Hamlet to lowbrow vaudeville. This volume ensured that no moment of existential worry went unmediated.
There was always a socially acceptable, culturally relevant thing to be doing or consuming instead of panicking.
It wasn't just noise, it was structured noise.
And this cultural focus generated its own power structure, the celebrity economy. We see detailed profiles on long-running vaudeville teams like Olsen and Johnson, who are described as having maintained their careers through overweening modesty. Then there's the critic Alexander Woollcott, who morphed into a war reporter, still operating with romantic intensity.
The celebrity in this scenario serves a vital institutional function. They are a stable, personalized focal point against chaos.
Like an anchor.
It's exactly. Olsen and Johnson, despite vaudeville supposedly being dead for a decade, represent the comfort of tradition. They are the predictable link back to the safe pre-Depression past. And the media institution expends significant energy chronicling these individuals, reinforcing their relevance, even as the underlying medium shifts from stage to radio to screen.
So the media acts as an institutional conservator of established fame, regardless of the cultural relevance of the art form itself. It's about maintaining the apparatus of celebrity.
It is. And that focus on personality and drama extended globally through film. We track high art foreign films, like the impressive French film Grand Illusion.
Which, fittingly, dealt with the absurdity of the last war, offering a complex, intellectualized mirror.
Right, and that's sitting alongside massive Hollywood epics like Marie Antoinette.
And then the casting controversy around Gone with the Wind. I love this detail because it's a perfect example of global tension being localized and domesticated.
Oh, it's perfect.
The casting of an English actress, Vivien Leigh, as Scarlett O'Hara, was described in some circles as an affront to Southern womanhood.
It sounds trivial, but analyze the structural mechanism at work here. The media institution expertly processed a truly global event, a major international talent being chosen for the biggest film role, and immediately refracted it through a highly localized, consumer-friendly American cultural tension.
Southern identity and heritage.
So instead of discussing the threat of Hitler...
They were talking about whether Dixie would secede from Selznick International.
Exactly. Global tension becomes packaged domestic drama. And that makes it infinitely more consumable and far less threatening than actual geopolitical analysis. The media learned that controversy sells best when it touches deeply on perceived cultural authenticity and identity politics.
It's the original online flame war.
It really is. Think about modern casting controversies today. Whenever a global production chooses an actor who doesn't perfectly match a fan's perception of cultural authenticity, the outrage machine spins up.
It's the same playbook.
That process refracting global news through a lens of local identity offense is a structural constant that allows the culture machine to monetize distraction. It validates the consumer's feeling of ownership over the story while diverting attention from things that actually matter, like, the rising defense budget.
Okay, let's look at the financial institutions. We have this absolutely gold standard piece of institutional self-analysis. The National Association of Manufacturers, or NAM, survey. It was designed to ascertain the present attitude of investors regarding the critical normal flow of new capital into industry. After years of depression, everyone needed to know how to unlock the money.
And this is where the stress test for 2026 really starts to pay dividends.
Yeah.
Because what they found was that the required stimulus for capital flow was not merely liquidity. It wasn't just the existence of good investment opportunities.
It was confidence.
It was confidence, defined purely as the absence of political risk. The money was paralyzed, and the NAM wanted to know why.
And the results are brutally specific about where that institutional fear lay.
They are. The top 4 fears cited by these institutional investors, which effectively froze the money supply, were, 83% complained about government legislation restricting industry.
83%, that's huge.
Then 77% feared the possibility of new taxes on industry. 62% feared labor troubles. and 62% feared the government taking too much in taxes from the individual taxpayer.
Let's just focus on those numbers. 3 of the top 4 at 83, 77, and 63% are fears of institutional interference.
Governmental or labor overreach. Yes. They weren't primarily afraid of another market crash or consumer demand drying up. They were afraid of the political system stifling the recovery.
This is the core structural insight, isn't it?
I think so. Capital, even in 1939, viewed political risks, specifically institutional unpredictability and interference by the state or organized labor, as the most potent existential barrier to economic expansion.
The New Deal.
The New Deal had restored some economic activity, but it had introduced deep uncertainty regarding the rules of the game. If 83% of your investors fear legislation, their investment decision is no longer purely economic. It's a political calculus.
Wait, are you saying that the institutional fear of government interference in 1939 of the New Deal restricting expansion is structurally the same as the fear of, say, antitrust regulation or stringent ESG mandates today? That feels a bit too neat.
It is structurally homologous.
Yeah.
Look, the names and the specific regulations change, but the incentive structure is identical. In 1939, it was fear of unionization and price controls. In 2026, it might be fear of aggressive antitrust action or international taxation agreements. The constant is that capital believes its greatest returns are unlocked not by technological innovation alone, but by a stable, predictable, and maximally permissive regulatory environment.
So the incentive isn't just about maximizing profit, it's about minimizing the risk of instability first. It's risk management disguised as a push for growth.
You've got it.
And if political risk is that potent, then the safest investment for capital isn't always innovation. It's political influence aimed at reducing that perceived institutional interference.
Exactly. The lesson is enduring. Regulatory certainty is the single most important stimulus for investment. When that certainty is threatened, capital contracts, regardless of the underlying profit potential. The fear of the unpredictable hand of the government, whether it's FDR's administration or a new regulatory push in 2026, persists as an institutional constant.
So we've established the government was the source of investment fear, but it was also a massive employer and patron during the Depression.
Right, the other side of the coin.
We see the institutional adaptation of the WPA, the Works Progress Administration. The Federal Music Theater was mounting serious concerto series, and WPA Productions staged classic works, including a significant production of Shaw's Androcles and The Lion with an all-Negro cast.
This is a profound institutional adaptation. When private patronage, rich donors and private theaters, when that collapsed under the weight of the Depression, the state stepped in, not just as a safety net, but as a foundational cultural patron and employer.
This changed the whole definition of arts funding.
It wasn't seen as merely charity.
It sounds like it was viewed as necessary infrastructure.
Precisely. The sources note that the Federal Symphony, under Shankman, for instance, offered clean, crisp presentations of classic work.
Clean and crisp.
That phrasing indicates the government assumed a role not just of employment, but of quality control. The institutional message was, government-sponsored art isn't low-grade, it's standardized, clean, and high quality.
A sort of public utility for culture.
And that's a critical precedent for today. It suggests that when private capital fails to support cultural or scientific endeavors, the state can step in and impose an internal quality standard that benefits the public.
And speaking of institutional efforts to shape perception, the New York World's Fair of 1939 was institutional storytelling on the grandest possible scale.
Oh, absolutely.
It was designed, according to the sources, as an attempt to interpret the metropolis to the nation and dispel hostility between town and countryside. It was explicitly a narrative management effort.
To sell the city to a skeptical heartland.
It's the ultimate PR campaign.
It is. The city government recognized that the experience of the city needed policing to conform to the utopian commercial narrative, the world of tomorrow. And to protect this macro narrative, they had to control the micro interactions.
Hence, the city giving special courses in politeness to cops and taxi drivers.
That detail is gold, isn't it? It's institutional control over the interface layer. They knew the cop on the corner or the cab driver could shatter the entire world of tomorrow illusion with a single rude word or a surly interaction.
The police and taxi drivers were forced to become frontline customer service agents for the Metropolitan brand.
Which is precisely what modern institutions do. Think about mandatory customer service trainings for every platform economy job, whether you're driving for a rideshare or delivering food. The institution, The platform must control the human interaction to protect the brand, even if the person doing the work is barely an employee.
The structural parallel is perfect. The institution tries to mandate the emotional tone of the transaction.
But despite all the rhetoric of tomorrow, the fair's core incentive was pure salesmanship, which the sources criticized sharply.
The architecture was described as being by Coney Island out of Los Angeles.
A great line, with high-concept monuments vying with incredible milk bottles and ice cream freezers.
So the veneer of high-minded progress was paper thin.
Absolutely. The institutional narrative was progress, utopia, the future. But the observable reality was that the structural incentives remained pure commerce. The fair was essentially a giant commercial stage set.
Not radical design.
No, it was about sale and packaging commercial products like ice cream and milk as monuments to progress. The sheer utilitarian smugness of the designs, as one source notes, was astonishing. Even the inclusion of an oil derrick busily chugging in the midst of nowhere was a stark reminder that despite all the utopian visions, the real backbone of the world of tomorrow was extraction and raw sales.
This next section is fascinating. It's about how easily society dismisses truly permanent structural shifts when they first arrive, dressed as temporary novelties.
Right. And fashion and material science are a great place to start.
We see the institutionalized cycle of planned obsolescence, highlighted by the quick demise of the bustle. The quote is, "Every year there is something like this which is done to death so quickly that it looks dated and silly almost at once."
The fashion industry's institutional role is the constant creation of artificial scarcity and mandated dissatisfaction. The bustle serves the function of demanding new purchases simply because the old silhouette is instantly rendered silly. It's pure ephemeral style.
But underneath that noise,
A genuinely permanent structural change was taking place. The rise of synthetic materials.
rayon, the man-made yarn.
Yes. Rayon is heavily advertised, described pompously as the aristocrat of man-made yarns, featured in triple shears and prints. It was initially marketed as a substitute or novelty something to compete with natural silk, which was expensive and subject to supply chain risks.
But the institutional lesson here is that rayon didn't stay a novelty. It became a permanent, foundational material.
It transformed the entire textile industry. The shift from relying solely on natural fibers, silk, cotton, wool, which are subject to geographical, climate, and geopolitical constraints, to synthetic materials fundamentally altered supply chains, price points, and material science forever.
So what seemed like a temporary replacement in 1939
A cheaper way to get that silky look.
proved to be an enduring structural modernization that provided material abundance and independence from traditional agrarian limitations.
And at the same time, while material science was shifting, we see the industrialization of self-worth take hold.
The cosmetic industrial complex, championed by figures like Helena Rubinstein. She had her Success School.
The Success School promised clients a new lease on life, explicitly tied to physical transformation, losing weight, and achieving a firmer face via the Dewberry Beauty Angle treatment. The system established a clear commercial pathway to fixing your identity.
There's a wonderful but slightly chilling detail in the source that ties the physical transformation, losing 30 pounds, to the client's stated desire to lead an active, constructive life.
And that narrative linking commercialized physical transformation to moral and societal legitimacy is foundational to the modern beauty and wellness industry.
It's everywhere now.
It normalizes the idea that self-worth, social acceptance, and the ability to live a constructive life are purchased, manufactured commodities. You don't just feel better. You are institutionally better because you bought the treatment.
And the marketing language used to sell this manufactured perfection is incredible. Angelus lipstick is marketed as being made to blend with the color of human blood, to achieve a thrillingly natural-looking effect, specifically avoiding the harsh wet paint look men despise.
So they were weaponizing male insecurity and using pseudo-biological language for lipstick sales even then.
It seems so.
Selling manufactured perfection as natural, using highly specific technical analogies like blending with the color of human blood, is an early, sophisticated manifestation of the structural incentive to obscure the artifice of industrial beauty.
It's the 1939 equivalent of a perfect Instagram filter that claims to be real or authentic.
That's a perfect analogy. The goal is to sell complex, artificial input while promising a return to natural, simple self-worth. That's a permanent structure of the modern economy.
Moving from the ephemeral to the material infrastructure, we see massive but often unnoticed structural investments that change daily life.
Right.
The Lincoln Zephyr advertisement declares that most roads in America are now first class, secondary roads have disappeared. That's a huge claim.
It's not a small change. It indicates a massive foundational governmental investment in infrastructure that completely altered mobility, reshaped geography, and fundamentally raised consumer expectations. The idea that bad roads have simply gone represents a huge structural shift in national capability and citizen expectation.
We take asphalt roads for granted, but in 1939, this improvement in seamless travel fundamentally underpins the rise of suburbanization, the changing nature of retail.
And the shifting focus of consumer wealth away from the dense city center. The structure of the environment changed, which changed the structure of society.
And at the same time, technology was being aggressively integrated into the home in ways that blurred the lines between media and domestic comfort.
Yes, the sources mentioned the majestic portable radio disguised as a piece of furniture hidden between book covers.
And the large Stromberg-Carlson corner cabinet radio with a patented labyrinth for natural tone.
Right.
Wait, so even back then, they were trying to disguise their technology like we try to hide our giant flat-screen TVs in custom cabinetry or integrate smart speakers into lamps?
It's peak interior design angst, 1939 edition.
Totally.
But it's the structural shift in media consumption. Media is transitioning from a communal-focused activity, the family gathering around the big box for the evening show, to an integrated, aesthetically pleasing, and personalized element of domestic life. The technology needs to look like it belongs.
The ad copy even references the utilitarian smugness of a radio disguised as a book cabinet.
And that smugness is the key incentive. Technology isn't just functional. It must be aesthetically assimilated into the upper-middle-class home to demonstrate taste and status.
It's not enough to have the best radio.
It must blend seamlessly into your sophisticated environment. This integration of media into daily aesthetic life is a permanent structural change that ensures technology is sold as a lifestyle choice, not just a utilitarian appliance. This is the origin story of the smart home.
Okay, let's pull back and identify where the institutional structure of this high-end media exhibited its most telling and ultimately most consequential blind spots, despite its overall sophistication.
The biggest failure was, I think, chronicling inertia, the institutional inability to focus on what was truly rising.
What do you mean by that?
Consider the detailed listing of vaudeville acts like
Right.
Olsen and Johnson, and the fact that the media was still devoting significant energy to chronicling this fading celebrity structure.
The vaudeville show was running for 24 seasons, but structurally, vaudeville itself was already obsolete, killed by radio and film.
Exactly. The media institution focused heavily on the familiar, even if the familiar was structurally defunct. It was easier to write about the long-running star than to analyze the emerging disruptive power of mass media forms that were actually taking hold. The institutional comfort zone was the star system of the past, not the structural dynamics of the future.
There's also that truly interesting piece of cultural analysis regarding Japanese detective fiction. The critic, a Mr. Itaru Nii, argues that Japanese writers, despite their knowledge of Western detective fiction, cannot create criminals consistent with scientific method.
And he blames climate and national character.
Yeah.
This reveals the limit of hypercultural analysis when confronted with systemic instability. The institutional assumption that crime and culture must be orderly, rooted in scientific method, and predictable national character. Well, it demonstrates a profound inability to foresee the total chaos that was about to engulf the globe.
The focus was so narrow.
So narrow on climate and character as immutable, orderly constraints that they missed the geopolitical reality.
In a global system rapidly descending into total war and espionage, the idea of an orderly, solvable, scientifically verifiable crime becomes ludicrously misplaced.
It was an intellectual failure to account for geopolitical disruption, a failure of the institutional assumption of intellectual order.
And finally, perhaps the most relevant parallel for 2026, the unseen financial complexity.
Yes, we have the case of the jailed financial expert Marion, whose fudged figures would make Einstein look like a schoolboy.
So this guy was an early master of financial obfuscation.
He was. And the anecdote demonstrates a persistent systemic failure. Marion was jailed, yes, but the investigators couldn't correct his fudged books without his help.
Wait, really?
That's what the source says. The sheer complexity of financial crime had already exceeded the institutional capacity of law enforcement and regulatory bodies to police it effectively.
So the structural lesson here is that financial crime had already gotten so complicated that the people tasked with enforcing the law essentially needed the criminal's help just to understand what he did wrong.
That is the ELI 5 version, yes. Financial nuance, complexity, and sheer speed already in 1939 were operating beyond the grasp of ordinary law and public scrutiny. This structural failure, where expertise effectively guarantees impunity, or at least extreme difficulty in prosecution, is one of the most enduring and costly institutional problems we face today.
Okay, so based on this cold analysis of 1939 institutions, their focuses, their failures, their structural constants, what are the key non-negotiable lessons we can carry forward for analyzing our current equally volatile environment in 2026?
We can derive 4 institutional lessons that are as applicable today as they were then. They define how power and capital manage risk and narrative.
Let's start with lesson 1, the function of culture.
Lesson 1. The utility of distraction is constant and structured. The 1939 New Yorker functions as an institutional mechanism designed to mediate extreme anxiety through structured, sophisticated consumerism.
So the primary function of high-end culture.
Dining guides, theater listings, fashion trends, celebrity profiles. During a period of extreme geopolitical risk, its main job is to provide elegant, intellectual cover for avoidance. It makes the consumption of the trivial feel culturally necessary.
An act of being informed about the latest play rather than informed about troop movement.
Exactly. It's the institution selling you an expensive, necessary anxiety reliever. The more danger there is, the more elaborate the distraction needs to be.
The system has to work twice as hard to keep you distracted when the stakes are highest. What about money? You highlighted the ANAIM survey as crucial.
Lesson 2. Regulatory capture is not new, and political risk is the potent inhibitor. The NAM survey is the institutional receipt. It proves the economic narrative, what capital perceives as risk, is primarily controlled by the perception of government restriction. 83% cited fear of legislation.
And this isn't just about hating regulation.
No, it's about the fundamental institutional desire for a predictable operating environment.
So the economic system is essentially saying, give us stability, not just tax cuts.
Yes. Political risk, defined as institutional unpredictability, regulation, taxes, labor challenges, is the single most potent inhibitor of capital flow. The incentive structure dictates that the safest and highest return investment is often political influence aimed at achieving regulatory certainty, rather than true, risky economic expansion or innovation.
Which is why the discourse around capital today is so intensely focused on policy and politics.
It's the existential barrier.
That brings us to lesson 3, the structure of authority.
Lesson 3. Institutional authority is fragile and must be resolute. This is best illustrated by a historical anecdote cited in the sources. The 1842 Somers Mutiny trial.
Right.
Midshipman Spencer, caught plotting piracy, claimed his entire scheme was only in joke.
A joke.
And the commander's response was immediate and structural. This joke, sir, may cost you your life.
He wasn't laughing.
He couldn't afford to. That clear, non-negotiable consequence, the commander drawing a resolute line between youthful flippancy and institutional severity, is what maintains stability. When institutional rules, whether military, legal, or financial, are challenged by actors who claim it was just a joke, or I was only testing the boundaries, the response has to be resolute and immediate.
Because if the institution treats an existential threat like a joke,
the entire structure dissolves instantly. The perception of institutional authority is incredibly fragile. We see this play out constantly today in courts, politics, and even corporations attempting to enforce behavioral norms. Authority cannot afford flippancy.
That seriousness is what separates order from chaos. And finally, the monetization of vulnerability.
Lesson 4. The spectacle of pain sells transformation. This is exemplified by the case of Dr. County, who ran the commercialized premature infant care exhibit at the World's Fair. He charged admission to see the babies in incubators.
And he used the shocking phrase, a peanut roaster, to describe his equipment. This wasn't a charity wing, it was an exhibit.
You paid money to gawk at vulnerability.
Right.
You paid to gawk at vulnerability under the guise of scientific progress and humanitarian care. The spectacle of pain, framed as a narrative of medical transformation and hope, was successfully integrated into the amusement industry by profit incentives.
And the institutional lesson is
profound. The public will pay a premium to observe difficult, vulnerable subjects so long as the viewing is legitimized by a commercial or scientific frame. That model vulnerability as spectacle, transformed into profit, is timeless. It persists today in reality TV, certain forms of clickbait journalism, and the entire wellness industry.
This deep dive into the institutional logic of 1939 reveals that the structural overlaps with 2026 are, well, they're striking.
They are.
The dominance of consumer distraction over existential threat, The absolute potency of investor fear defined by political risk and the monetization of human vulnerability through spectacle.
So what does this all mean?
In 1939, a refined, sophisticated society was meticulously distracted by the placement of their corner cabinet radios, the color of their Angelus lipstick, and the drama of celebrity casting. All while institutional structures, financial oversight, political polarization, and military capability were visibly straining under the pressure of imminent global upheaval.
They were paying absolute attention to the surface sheen of stability, trusting that the institutional logic of the past would somehow hold.
This raises an important question.
The 1939 sources show how deeply embedded institutional inertia, the detailed constant focus on celebrity, fashion cycles, and domestic comfort, can be, even when the external system is screaming imminent collapse.
So, what seemingly trivial aspect of the 2026 media and cultural landscape, which we currently treat as temporary, irrelevant, or merely fashionable at the moment, will a future analyst identify as the single most structural piece of institutional failure in our time?
Is it the deep systemic belief that global financial systems could not be fundamentally altered by technology? Or maybe the assumption that social media engagement and outrage machines were benign externalities rather than the primary structural force driving political action?
The systems we ignore today are the failures of tomorrow.